Sometimes when you're building out an expedition camper, you not only need new tools, but you actually break your old tools. Point being right here. Howdy, welcome back to my channel. I'm building out an expedition camper. And so in my previous video, I showed you the camper I built and the inside of that, and also went over the design of that new camper. And in this video, I'm going to build a skid plate. And in the process, I also have to renovate or rebuild some tools. So here we go. So hang on. Thank you for watching. You must have used up a lot of the grease and the goop. And so I've got to replace all that goop because I've got some really noisy gears, a burned out chop saw blade, and also now even a burned out aluminum blade from some other cuts I was making. So I've got to replace these and get this repaired so I can get back to business and making the skid plate that's going to go underneath there, the new camper vehicle, the skid plate, and also the catalytic converter protector plate guard. More on that coming up. Okay, so to back out a little bit here, here's the battery. So we got driver's side, come back about 2 feet. You can see in here we've got several threaded holes. There's one, there's two, there's three, there's four. Here's another one right here. And those threaded holes, we follow this right underneath around, they go into this transmission mount slash cross member. Anyways, I tried these bolts. I went ahead and bought these M10 by 20s. They do not thread in. I'm sure they're going to be metric. These bolts holes, it's possible they are not happen to be there from factory, but it's possible. It seems unlikely they would have put threaded holes in there and not put bolts in them. I'm going to put them in, just make sure this cross member on the chassis rails and this transmission mount are solid. So I get on with designing out and building my skid plate, and basically what this is made up of is a bunch of 1/4 inch angle aluminum brackets that attach to the frame multiple places and have some kickers going out at 45 or some other angles to available attachment points on the chassis frame to ensure that it's braced and supported in multiple directions. And I'm sure you're asking, Casey, like, why are you using aluminum instead of steel? And there's a few reasons. One is it was somewhat what was available to me as far as like supply chain issues and things like that at the time for the different components. It was also something I can work with available tools and skills that I have to be able to work with it. It's also something that won't generally rust, although it is connected to a steel frame, so it's going to be the corrosion point. And that's okay if it's a corrosion point. If the skid plate tends to rust away over a few decades, it can easily be replaced at some point in time. And that is the intent anyways. This is kind of somewhat of a temporary solution. It's silly to spend time on a temporary solution, but I really want to get this done, protect not only the catalytic converter from theft while the truck is being parked out, as it's very vulnerable in its current state and position, but also to give the truck a little bit of a skid plate and aerodynamic profile on the bottom of the truck. That's because the transfer case hangs down so low, it is vulnerable to both the wind as well as to sand or sagebrush and things like that. And that's really what I'm protecting this chassis and truck from with this skid plate. It's not there to be a rock crawler. It is there really just protect against things like sand and sagebrush and so forth. So this will suffice more than adequately. So I get busy drilling and machining down these angle brackets, cutting them the right length so they can all mate up at the same elevation for the skid plate that is going to mount up, which is also going to be a 1/4 inch thick sheet of aluminum, 36 inches wide by 36 inches long. And I'll show you why it is specifically of that length coming up soon. Like stuck in my own cage here. Yeah. Unfortunately, getting the bolts through the frame rails and the nuts on the back side of those bolts and between The brake lines and the fuel lines and all that is tricky. It definitely takes some effort and time just to get them up in there, and also the washers that I have on both the front and back sides of these. But nonetheless, working them all up in there, gets them all in there, and gets these braces, both vertical and angled braces, going up to the chassis rails, really strong on there. Each one of those has 3 or 4 bolt connections to the chassis frame, so they are on there very strong. And so I angled these angled ones in a way that they could actually attach to the frame rail with at least a couple different attachment points, and then of course bolted all the way through in the bottom with another set of angles wrapping around call it the frame of the skid plate, and then the skid plate itself actually bracing up against that. You also see a little bit later on here an expanded piece of sheet metal that is a perforated expanded piece sheet metal, so it's fairly strong and a little bit tricky to get cutters or something in there, but yet still allows ventilation through. And this will make sure that the exhaust system has ventilation, as well as the other drivetrain components have ventilation on this side, and yet really keeps or at least limits the ability for somebody to get in there and just simply or easily cut away the exhaust system, which is now pretty well protected when this is all done with the skid plate below it.
That's what happens when your drill bit is shot. So I am replacing that drill bit. That one's going in the trash. It is shot. But this is going to get me my last final skid plate brace. This is not necessarily the best drilling method, but it works. All right. Bravo. Well, that went in a lot quicker than I thought. That's better.
Yep, this would be a lot safer with a wider drill press table or stand of some sort to support this, but I was able to hand hold it up, even though it's still pretty heavy, beefy, 1/4 inch aluminum, 3 feet by 3 feet, and with an angle on it. But this is, again, not really the safest way to be drilling this, so not what I recommend, but I had a good handle on it.
Alright, so what we have here is finally this skid plate. It took way more time to fabricate all these holes and countersink them so the bolts are flush with the bottom of the skid plate. Everything lined up, and really what took some extra time was the front, since I couldn't get the front of the skid plate bent at a 45-degree like I wanted to. It's a 1/4 inch plate here, so because I couldn't get it bent, it's going to have to take a week or two of waiting. I didn't want to wait, and so I went ahead and bolted up a angle to the front, and so that not only strengthens it but also gives it a kind of its scrape over, so the skid plate itself doesn't just bash into something and get caught. And it took a while to get that fabricated, way longer than I wanted it to, but nonetheless, this baby's on now. And I am just tightening up all the bolts all the way around. I'll show the other side too. And as these get all tightened up, this thing is really going to strengthen this whole thing up, which it was already incredibly strong. If I crank on these frames here that support the skid plate, these here, they don't move. It just moves the whole truck. Just rocks it. Nothing moves. And now once I get the other side tightened up, it's going to be really tight and strong. Okay, let's get this all nice and tightened up. Oh, yes. Beautiful. All right. 2 bolts to go. Ow. That's a sharp edge. Oh. Beautiful. See that? Just rocking the truck. The whole thing's really strong. Let me show you how I've got this supported here. In the rear, you see I actually have it resting right onto the transfer case. So the transfer case can take this weight, and transfer case still move around a little bit because it's just flush on the bottom here. And I still have access to my drain plug there for the transfer case. And then this thing obviously clear. This is a hard mount for the drive shaft to the transfer case. So it clears that. I've got a cutout here. So when this yoke, if the front drivetrain drops down, which it can't drop that far, but when it does drop down ever much, and this is going to obviously just angle back a little bit, I've got a cutout there for that. And this whole plate here in the front is not only to strengthen it, like I said, but give it a ramp here on the front. And then I've got my cage here, which I reinforce just to keep it from kind of flexing around on the loose, on the less supported here. And I had to kind of do a bump out around the catalytic converter because of the way it bumps out here. But nonetheless, this whole entire cage is here to protect the catalytic converter, and so really to prevent people from being able to easily get back in there and get to the pipes. And obviously a lot of it's protected by the skid plate itself. So that's pretty exciting. It's done. I'm excited. That's one project done on this truck. Well, another project done. One of many that have been done, and many, 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 many more to go.
And speaking of coming up, what's next coming up is a really big one. I got to cut 5 really big holes in the walls of my brand new Expedition camper to install the windows. These are very exciting. These are some great Expedition camper glass windows from Europe that I'm going to be installing, along also with the entry door and 2 skylights in the roof. So hang tight, more to come.